Jazz is often defined by its freedom of expression and ignoring of the kind of quote unquote traditional rules of music. And so this mentality of freedom of expression and ignoring the conventional rules of minimal tech was something that I tried to bring into this track. And so I'll talk about a few approaches that I took to bring that flavor into this song. So my name is Kirk, aka Wait For Me, and this is a breakdown of my track Jazz in C that is out now on Nozzo Records. So to start things off, we have my kick here, and so I'll solo it so you can hear it by itself. And with this, really nothing special. I always try to focus on just finding one sample for my kick, something that's really a whole and complete kick that basically covers the whole frequency spectrum. So that way, if I have a kick that covers the whole frequency spectrum from the low end all the way to the top end, what I can do is I can basically just carve out anything I need to carve out of that kick to make it fit the track. So with this one, you can see over here on my EQ, I've taken a little bit out of this low mids range, and I've also done some shelving here on the top end to really kind of remove a little bit of that top end click. Well, not necessarily remove it, but just push it down because again, this is kind of minimal tech music. I didn't want too much of a commercial sounding kick in this track. I wanted something deep sounding. So let me turn it on and off so you can kind of hear the A/B. Yeah, so you notice when I turn the EQ off, you can just hear a lot more of that click coming through on the top end. And again, that just sounds a little bit too kind of EDM-y, a little bit too commercial to me. So just taking a little bit of that out is the approach I took to make it fit the track. Versus doing things the other way around, where people will start with a really deep kick, you know, something that doesn't have a lot of top end, and then after that, what they'll do is they'll look to add top end with a layer. I like to take the reverse approach, right? Have a kick that's full, have a kick that has something that covers the whole frequency spectrum, and then remove from it. I find it just to be a lot easier than trying to get two samples to kind of glue together. And then with this too, really minimal processing. I have a decapitator on here, just a little bit of drive. It's only at about a 50% dry wet, and then reducing the output a little bit because of the gain that the decapitator adds. But really with my kicks, that's it. I tried to keep things very minimal processing, one sample, just finding something that's going to fit with the track. Next after that, I have a few different other kick channels. I have my dub kick, which is like double kicks, like boom, 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 that sort of stuff. I like to keep those in a separate track because you'll see in my bass, I sidechain it, I volume sidechain it. So the sidechain is not triggered by the kick. It's just triggered by basically a volume LFO. So in order to have like a good separation and in order to create another side chain for those dub kicks, I like to keep them in a separate track. So that way, as you see over here, for my side chains, I have my LFO tool doing the 4 on the floor side chaining, and then I have my compressor right here doing the side chaining from the dub kick. Again, I just like that separation, just gives you a lot more control, a lot more easy to manage. And I also have a filter kick channel. Sometimes I like to just have, yeah, as you can see over here, basically the low end filtered out from my kick. Again, I like to have just individual channels for all these type of things. Just gives you a lot more control. And then finally over here, I have my kick rolls in a separate channel as well. Because typically what I like to use is a different style kick as I'm building towards that final drop. And also, again, I just like isolation on those things. It just gives you a lot more control. One thing as well is I tend to high pass the effects as I build into the drop. And so that low end information in the kick roll, I still want a lot of that low end information in there as it builds up towards the drop. And so having it in a separate track just gives you a lot of control. All right, so next is the drums. And so let's take a listen to them as a whole. I really try to make my drums as intricate as possible. A lot of call and response, a lot of back and forth. And that really just comes from just like my inability to create like melodies and hooks and things like that. Well, not inability, I'm just not as good at it as I am with things like percussion. So whenever I'm building a groove, I'm really focusing on how can I make things as interesting as possible just with my drums. Because I know if I do that, I'm setting really good groundwork to keep my track interesting for the full 6 minutes, for the full 7 minutes, or whatever it is that the track ends up being. So going through my drums one by one, I usually start with some sort of top loop. I really like to have some set or some kicking off point with my tracks. And a lot of times that's just going to be some sort of top loop where I like the groove, I like the swing. And so basically I'm just going to build the whole track, all the drums, the whole groove around that. So I started with this top. After that, I added these two claps. This one's for a little bit of brightness. This one has a little bit more body around the 1K. Then I have a fat snare and a dry snare. Let's see what these sound like. Yeah, so these two right here, really kind of adding body to that clap. So that way there's just a little bit more impact on it. Claps, they just tend to be all high end. So adding the body of a snare is just going to make it feel more complete, make your drum groove kind of feel more solid. After that, we have a little percussion hit. Let's see what that's all about. Yeah, just a tiny little bongo. Something like that. That's just usually sometimes putting something down like that. It's just kind of the start of my groove, the start of my call and response. After that, I have two hats that come in. So let's see what this is. And then this one. So this one's more of a transient hat. This one's more of a filler hat. It's a little bit longer. Has a little bit longer of a tail versus this one that's pretty like sharp transient. Let me turn those on and go back to the drums. This is where we are now. And then we're bringing in this guy, which is, let's see what it is. So this is just a little vocal hit. Oftentimes I like to just put kind of weird samples, different samples into my drum groove. So sometimes I'll use just little vocal shouts, put that stuff in there. So that way it just adds to the variety of the loop. And then we have a perky top. So let's see what this adds. So this is adding just a little bit of a percussion groove. And so it's not playing really consistently throughout the whole loop. You'll see that a lot of it happens here, and then it kind of pauses. A lot of it happens here, and then it kind of pauses. This is to create a little bit of that kind of back and forth motion with the drum groove. And then we have tiki-taka, which is, the style of music. A lot of people call it like tiki-taka house, like tick, 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 right? So oftentimes when I'm building grooves and I don't have that feel yet, I'll go and try to find some sort of loop that I can bury underneath the drums to add that tiki-taka feel. So let's see what that sounds like. First we can do it by itself. Let's see what it sounds like. Yeah, very staccato, very tick, 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 tick. And with this one, I'm not looking for too much high end. I'm really looking for just kind of that mid-range body that's going to sit low in the mix. That's going to help that drum groove feel very tiki-taka, tiki-taka. So let's play the drums again by themselves, and I'll A-B that so you can hear the difference. Yeah, so it's just adding a little bit of that tiki-taka, very percussive, almost shaker style mid-range. After that, we have 2 shakers, so let's add those. So these ones, what they're really doing is just adding very high, very kind of crispy top end. I'm not looking to interfere too much with these hats over here, where they kind of dominate this space, right? Around just below the 10K space. These shakers, what they do is they dominate like above 10K, right? We're really looking just for that information over here to add that air, that crispiness. You do have to be careful with that stuff. You know, when you have hats on top of shakers, all that sort of stuff, it can end up being too much. So always make sure to focus on really like your volume control, and making sure anything that you're adding, there's space for it. So if I say like I added this shaker right here and it has a lot of information above 10K, but then I go back to my hat here and it also has a lot of information above 10K, what I'm going to need to do or think about is what's one element I can either replace or what's one element where I can take out information from that 10K, so that way that shaker, that sound can kind of fit nicely into the frequency spectrum. And really just think about it like as puzzle piecing. And then finally, I have something here called the low top. Let's see what this adds. So I think the reason I add this was it has a little bit of a disco feel on it, and I just wanted kind of that sitting way in the background. This might be, you know, adding too much into my loops, into my drum grooves, and I tend to do that stuff, but ultimately it was something where I was probably just cycling through some loops and I found it and I thought it sounded really good. It also definitely has yeah, it's like a disco style loop and it has some reverb on it. So maybe I just liked kind of the atmosphere of it, the space it was in, and I wanted to bring that to the drums. So after that, I have my rides, which only come in every so often just to add energy to the track. Let's play those by themselves. These are probably just some typical rides. Yeah, really looking just to add some like high-end crispiness. It sits on top of all the drums at certain moments in the track when I need to add just a little bit more energy. And then so after that are all these pieces down here. So let me unsolo all of them really quick, and then I'm going to solo them so that way we can just hear exactly what they are or how they're playing together. Because this portion of my drum groove, this is really kind of the call and response. This is the back and forth. These are the elements that I'm adding into my drum groove that are going to keep things interesting for 8 bars, for 16 bars, for 32 bars. Because as you can notice, a lot of these are really sporadically, they're sporadically placed. And this is to create just like more turnarounds, more interest, more kind of progression as the drum groove moves forward. So let's play them by themselves and see what we get. Yeah, so all sorts of crazy stuff. So let me mute these again. Let's listen to the drum groove without them. So it's a good groove, it's a good loop, it has all the elements you need, but there's nothing that's really kind of pushing it forward. So all these elements that I bring in here, they really help just push the groove forward. So take a listen when I add them. Yeah. You notice I have a lot of stuff that happens on the turnarounds. I have something that's happening here, and then a variation of that happening here. Right, not doing the same thing every single time. So that way, again, it's a loop that keeps you guessing. It's a loop that keeps moving forward. Have a little crash right here. Yeah, things build up towards the turnaround right here. So that's my drums. And then for processing, I usually like to start off with a clipper just to kind of shave off any super aggressive transients that are popping through. From there, I have a glue compressor using that kind of pumping effect, really slow release, fast attack. So that way the tracks are kind of moving with the compressor. After that, an audio effect rack. Let's see that. Oh, this one is, I added just a little bit of kind of top end transient on this. I think I got this from somebody on YouTube or something like that. I was just giving it a try. It's not something I always do, but it ended up working out for this track. So basically, I did this in parallel. I have the dry signal here, and then I have this little transient kind of high-end sizzle right here. Let's take a listen. Yeah, so really subtle, really light. It ended up working out on this track. This is something that you can kind of overdo it on, though. It's not something I typically see myself doing. After that, I have a saturator here. I just usually like to turn it to soft sine, put it at like 75%, bring it down about 3 dB. I usually find just by adding soft sine, just by changing it to this algorithm, it adds about 3 dB gain. So you can take that away just by pulling the output down. After that, I have an EQ. That's just taking out any super low information that might be popping up. So that way I can make room for the kick and the bass. A little bit of a duck here between that 1 and that 3K range. Not something I do every time, but that is kind of a good area to check out in your drum groove. 1 to 3K is the range of frequencies that fatigue the ears most quickly. So oftentimes you just want to make sure you're not overloading that for your listener. And then after all this processing, I have another standard clip, another clipper, because this stuff can sometimes, again, shoot things up a little bit, create more transients. And so anything that's really kind of popping through, I just want to shave that off so that way the pre-master is going to be nice and clean, nice and even, no transients popping through, and it'll make the mastering a lot easier. So just to note this, I have a transition rack and then an auto filter. These are just my automation tools. I use these just for really quick, easy automation. I made this transition rack a couple of years ago, and it just has a few different easy to grab macros to where I can just be making builds really easy. So if we take a listen to this, you can see this stuff moving. You can see the verb increasing. I pull the lows out a little bit. Yeah, just like that. Okay, so after that, I have what I call my atmosphere groove. This is just an additional layer of call and response that I like to put into my tracks. Again, this comes from my, I have no musical background, no musical training except for, anything I've learned on YouTube over the last, 6 or 7 years. And so because I kind of struggle with musicality and music theory and all that sort of stuff, but I want my tracks to be more musical, what I often like to do is I like to sample a track or find a sample that's going to be in the same key as the bass over here, which this bass ended up being, it was in C minor, hence Jazz in C, right? I think I originally titled, I titled this track just Bass in C, just to remember that the bass line was in C minor. But at the end of the track, because I found that jazz sample and because I, had a few other samples in this which were, it can be kind of considered jazz because it's a freedom of expression. They're like kind of unconventional samples. I just figured, I'm going to title the track Jazz in C. But so this atmosphere groove, let's take a listen. So basically what it is it's like a little disco guitar, just really heavily affected. I only have it kind of hanging out here in the high mids. And then I have an auto filter with an envelope on it and an LFO. So that way that auto filter is just kind of moving back and forth in the background. And again, this is just to create a bit of a call and response type of rhythm that goes along with the drums. Let me play it with the drums. So again, because that's musical, because it has a key signature, what I really like about that atmosphere groove is it just adds like a melodic bed to my track. So let me actually do this. I'll play the whole track and I'll take the atmosphere groove out, and you'll notice the difference big time. So let me play it from here. I'm going to take the groove out. Yeah, so I mean, still a good track. It has groove, it has everything you need, it has percussion, it has some musical elements, all that sort of stuff, but it almost like takes away from like the vibe and the feel of the track. So that's why I like to add that stuff. Next I have fills, which I'm not going to go through these one by one. I just like to keep these in separate groups because I typically like to process them separately than my main drums. I typically just don't do as heavy of a processing on my fills. Again, I just like to keep things separate, just provides more control. But if we listen to these by themselves, just some simple fills. Stuff like that, stuff like this. I guess one thing to notice about these fills is I like to grab things from all sorts of different packs. You know, I have very kind of conventional fills where it's like, oh, that's obviously a drum kit. And then I have very electronic kind of bit crushed sound samples like this. I just like to create a lot of variety and that sort of stuff, so that way it keeps things interesting. After that, I have my bassline. This is pretty much how I build all my bass lines. I like to just chop up samples, take one note from this one note from this one, whatever it is. Usually I'm looking for samples that are going to be in the same key, you know, bass loops that are going to be in the same key. But there's been plenty of times where I really like the tone of a certain note from a loop that's in a different key, and I'll just pull it into the track and just pitch it up and down so that way I can get it towards a note that's in the key. Again, with this track, the bass ended up being in C minor, so let's take a listen. So I'm guessing with this one, what I did was I started with these two right here. Let me solo them, which is this. And so these are kind of really like smooth, flowy kind of groove bass notes. And what I ended up doing was I had a lot of gaps to fill, like right here, all this space right here. And so I figured instead of adding more smooth notes, I could add some really staccato notes here. So that way it would just create variation in the bass groove. All right, so moving on to my synths and musical group, right? So this is my group for everything synths, or, you know, kind of like instruments thing, whatever. You know, it's anything that's just basically not bass, not drums, not a kick. So let me play it by itself. There's a few different elements that I have in here. A lot of them kind of come in at different places. But let me play it as a whole right now. All right, so let's take a look at some of the main elements. First things first is probably the really kind of standout sound within the track, which is this stab, right? So I believe this was just a sample that I found. And if we take a listen, this is what it sounds like. Very bright, very kind of synthy, very disco-y, right? And then I did a layer with it. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, so maybe I added that layer. I must have froze and flattened it because there's like no processing here on the audio effects. So maybe it was something that I made really wide, so that way the drop, you know, it would hit on the stereo, like it would hit in the center and the middle, and then also hit really wide, just kind of really driving a lot of impact behind that sound. And then it looks like I did some resampling here with that stab as well every so often. Yeah, so like a little staccato hit. I probably, turned it down to 1/16 with the beats mode, brought it all the way down to 0, so that's way it's just a little And that's just adding a tiny bit of call and response. And also I have this this LFO controlling this node right here on the EQ8, just kind of moving it back and forth so that way it's not the same sound every single time. There's just going to be little frequency picks, little frequency peaks at every different hit. So that way you just get a different sound every single time. Yeah. After that, I have some piano sounds, taking a listen to those. Let's see if these are coming in. Yeah, so these are hitting every so often, very punchy. I believe this piano hit right here is a little bit more sustained. Yeah, so basically these right here, they're really kind of hinting that this big piano hit's going to come in. I'll show you right here. So you can very subtly hear it, providing a little bit of introduction. Right, and what that does too is it creates variation between this drop right here, between the B section of the first drop and the A section, right? Because the A section just does this, just has the hit, and then the B section is going to have the hit, but then this piano that responds to it. Yes. Yep. And then also a little drum fill to kind of lead you in, create a little bit of variation. A few other things here. I have chords. Let's see what these sound like. Oh yeah, these are kind of the main call and response chords. That kind of main element that's going on in the background. Just really simple, really staccato, but it goes along with the groove. It creates a nice back and forth. You can notice it really does some good calling and responding with the bass line here. So if I solo the bass line and then I solo just this part right here, you can notice the smooth hits come in, and then these chord shots, they really kind of respond to the smooth hits from the bass line. Yep. And then so a few other things here. I have something called sustain. Let's see what that is. Slowly rising up. This is probably a resample from something in the track. I used it basically just as a lead-in to the breakdown here. From here, I have chords 2 and 3. So what I probably did was I took these chords, I resampled them, and then I'm bringing them into the breakdown, just doing a little bit of affecting on them, messing with them a little bit. So that way I'm taking elements that I'm already using in my track and I'm bringing them to the breakdown and I'm creating effects with them to keep my breakdown really interesting. And at the same time, all this stuff is really going to fit because it's already been in my track. I'm not jumping to a new sample pack and getting effects from like a random sample folder where I have to try really hard to make sounds fit. So let's solo these and see what they sound like. Yeah, so really delayed, kind of creating that wall of sound that you can build up towards before you pull it all away in the drop. Sine beat. That was over here too. A low string. Let's see what this is. This is really low. The piano again. Yeah, a lot more delay on it. Really big, again, creating that wall of sound as we go towards the drop. And let me play this all together. I have this thing called Alien Talk. Guess it was just a sample that I thought really kind of fit well in the track. There we go. Cool. And then I have a little effect that comes in here at the end, disco reverse. I might have made this out of, let's see what happens when I re-reverse it. I have no idea where I got this sample, but it's cool. But I did it as basically a final lead up towards the silence, just before the drop. So again, let me play this all together so you can hear that.
Jazz. 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 Jazz.
Yeah. I don't always do that, just having a ton of silence right before the drop. I feel like it's just something you hear just constantly. But I felt like in this track, it was just kind of cool. It really made, when this guy says jazz, it made it fit because when I introduce it over here, let's see.
Jazz.
Oh, I did the same thing. I just basically pulled it out. Yeah, I really just wanted to isolate that word. I think it just has like a lot of impact and it's just really memorable. And then how I made it different from that first drop over there was I had him say jazz and then the dub kick. This thing hits 4 times right before the drop. Just creates a lot more impact as an intro to the drop.
Jazz.
Cool. Okay, so moving on to the vocal group, let's take a solo listen of just the vocals and the breakdown. With my vocals and my vocal groups, I'll tend to have like my main vocals and all my vocal effects and my one shots, all that sort of stuff, just kind of in the same group. Probably not the best way to do it, but you know, it is just the way I do it. It just helps me kind of stay organized. Yeah, so I have like these diva vocals kind of going on in the background. I have this guy saying running. I have another kind of diva hit right here. This is really providing a good kind of call and response, a little bit of a phrasing. And then this diva vocal right here, it's very kind of loose and expressive and ad-lib. So it adds a lot just to that breakdown. It adds to the interest of the breakdown because, you know, there's really not a lot of stuff repeating in it. It's just basically evolving over the whole breakdown. But providing like a good mixture of something that really doesn't have like a rhythm. It's just kind of expressive and going on over the breakdown. Coupling that with something that does have a rhythm, it just adds a lot of that interest, so that way you can keep people engaged during your breakdown. It's just like a little vocal effect. Let's see. Yeah, just kind of a shout, and then this was like again, something rhythmic. And I'm sure this kind of rhythm, it definitely inspired me to go make some chords that were in a similar rhythm. You can notice kind of like the rhythmic motif is very similar to this right here. Yeah, so that way things are kind of tying together nicely. Going back to the vocals. Yeah, so a bunch of different like little effects, and this is where kind of the unconventional part comes in. So like I have this low chop that comes in. These are like all different samples, all weird kind of samples that I was just, you know, I think what was happening with this track was I was really kind of struggling with, you know, getting things into the track, and I was like being difficult with myself, being like, that doesn't fit, that doesn't fit, that doesn't fit. And then finally, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the kind of jazz approach to this. I'm going to take the unconventional approach. I'm going to go find sounds that if I put them into the track and my brain immediately says, you know what, that fits. It doesn't matter where the sound came from or, you know, if the sample's way different than the other stuff that you've heard before. As long as it fits, as long as it feels like it's part of the track, then it doesn't matter what the sound is or where it came from. So I have like this low chop, Glenn. Let's see what it said. Yeah, the The guy says, it sounds like he's saying Glenn, right? I do that oftentimes when I'm like naming my tracks. I'll just, whatever the one shot is, whatever they're saying, I'll just type it out here. So that way it's really easy to find and remember. I have, let's see what this is. That sort of stuff. Let's do this. Check this. Let's see what this is.
Stop that.
Yeah, so just kind of a little bit of sample and then Let's see what this is. I wonder if I'll get demonetized. That's definitely Ralph, or not Ralph. Who's the bully from The Simpsons? I can't remember his name, but it's definitely him. Ralph is the kid that he bullies, but I can't remember what the bully's name is. But again, that's kind of the jazz approach, right? It's like, that is a weird sample, and it's really bizarre, but I thought it was just kind of cool in there. After this guy said jazz, and I said, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to keep it. So all together, let's take a listen again.
Jazz.
Cool. And then finally, I have my effects group here. So a lot of stuff going on, snare rolls and little things that are resampled. Basically, they're doing the heavy lifting during the breakdowns. And then also, I'm adding little things every so often just to keep the track interesting and, little surprises, little hits, things like that. Let me solo it. Yeah, so this guy's saying jazz over and over and over and over again. It's basically what this is really doing is it's giving you a hint. It's giving you a lead up towards that jazz vocal, that word, that one shot that happens right before the drop. These effects are a little loud. Worked out, have a limiter on the group so that way nothing's poking through. No transients are really heavy. But yeah, going through, I don't want to go through these all one by one because there is a lot. You get your snare rolls, another snare roll. I usually like to layer them because I like to process different snare rolls kind of differently. One of my tricks is to do OTT automation on a snare roll. It really just kind of fattens the signal, takes all the tails of the snares and really just like opens them up, makes them really large, really fat, and just adds like, again, that like wall of sound that you want to have before the drop. This really low layer or something, just some random effect, jazz effect, crashies, some crashes too. Some noise, simple stuff, noise risers, mechanical noise. This is stuff that sits way in the background. Let's see what that is. Yeah, so I believe I just brought this in and I automated it heavily. And you can see it kind of slowly rises up towards the breakdown right here. And then I pull it out and slowly rise it up towards the second drop. Again, it's just to create like movement and things just kind of happening in the background of your track, so that way your track doesn't sound loopy. It's not static, right? There's constant movement. There's constantly things going up and down and to the left and to the right as your track evolves. And the best way to do that typically is with automation. Automation can really help you bring a track to life. And then, so going back here, that's really it for this track. I'll play it right here from for the last drop, and then we'll be done.